Alright guys, welcome to some shock rebuilding. Last time I had this big guy out, this is the Losi Super Rock Ray. It was basically doing some donkey kicking. When I'd hit some jumps, it was really kicking this thing up, not dampened the way it should be. So we're going to do a little bit of shock rebuilding on this thing today, just to see, if we can get that to be a little bit better. Since I got this, I haven't done any of the shocks. I've run it a bunch, and it's pretty much just whatever they put in this thing from stock. So I believe I'm not 100% sure, don't quote me, it's probably like a 40, 45. What we're gonna do is we're gonna get this rebuilt. We're gonna put some 80 weight in here and make it a little bit better. And once I get to that point, I'm just gonna take these shocks out, and then I'll get to the point of showing you on the shocks rebuild itself, or not necessarily the rebuild, but refill, I should say, and explain a little bit how, for those of you who don't know, how some of the shocks work, what does what. So we're gonna get at it. Let me get this shock off here. Okay, so the first thing you want to do when you're going to either refill a shock or rebuild a shock, you want to get these springs off. Most shocks are going to be the same way. You're just going to push up to take this retainer off. So when you slide that up, take some tension off the spring, and then the retainer comes off. From there, you just pull your spring off, and it lets everything apart just like that. So you're going to have your shock rod, your lower end, obviously your spring, and your lower retainer. That's what these guys are actually called, again, for those of you who don't know. This is your shock body. These are threaded bodies. Some of these you'll see on popular cars have little spacers you put in here to adjust your tension. Basically what you're adjusting with that is, and you put the pieces in there, or you adjust this, you're gonna squeeze this down, put a little more tension. That's gonna adjust your ride height and kind of make some of that a setup there. The oil inside here, what it's going to do is change this dampening, how fast it allows the spring or the shock to open back up again. If it's really thin, it's going to let this open really fast here and cause a car to be very bouncy in the back. If a shock is low on oil, it's going to also cause that same, it's going to get real bouncy because it won't have anything, no resistance working against it whatsoever. There's a couple components in here. Let's see if we can get this thing open. Okay, so what we're going to do is get this open, and when you crack your cap off here, this body is going to be filled with fluid, and then that's again what acts as your resistance. So we're going to get this. You want to be careful here because depending on how full or not full, you can kind of see inside here the cap. This piece that's in here is called your bladder, and they're made to give a little bit, and that's to help with your dampening and stuff in your shock. So this doesn't look too bad, actually. You can see it has a little bit of dirt and stuff in there, but it's actually not too bad because this car really wasn't run much before I got it. It was just kind of putted around since I've had it. I've only ever ran it a few times, but I've been kind of rough on it. Sometimes you'll see on these things they're going to be very, very dirty, which can cause lots of other problems. Shocks not work right, or they'll be empty or partially empty. These actually look pretty good. So you want to take this, if you're doing anything real major rebuild, you're going to get all this cleaned out, and you can kind of spray this out. Now unfortunately I don't have any spray here. I wasn't planning on doing this, but that's all right. I can still get this taken care of here. Wipe this down a little bit to show you the bladder, or the retainer. So you'll see the piston that's inside here if you can get a good look. On this particular one, there's 5 holes in here. So, because these are pretty healthy size shocks. So one of the other features you can do on tuning a shock is changing out this little, this piece right here, and you can see each one of these little holes basically is what your oil is going to pass through. So when your shock is compressed, going back, the number of holes and the thickness of your fluid will help decide, or determine rather, how fast this shock is going to rebound, how bouncy your car is going to be. You know, is this thing going to be all over the place, or is it going to be a little more controlled? Some conditions, you know, require things to be different. You can change these out and put less piston or less holes in them, more holes. That's going to change that thickness of your fluid. All kinds of things you can do to shocks to really change them, so it's not just stuck with whatever factory did or whatever factory put in there. Some people will even go in and drill an extra hole in with a small drill bit to change that as well. But for today, we're looking pretty good. I'm not going to go too crazy because I'm about to take this thing out and do some whooping on it again. So we'll just show you a quick refill here. It's going to be pretty simple. But that's mostly your components here. Like I said, this is very kind of a shock in its generic form for what it's going to do, how to do it. I might do a full rebuild on one a little later to show the different seals and everything else in here. But when you go to do, actually I don't know if I have this one. Got to make sure you take your seal to get off at the fluid. Can't tell you how many times I've already tried to sit here squeezing fluid out and realizing there's a cap inside there yet. So the next important part that we're going to do is you're going to want to fill this. No rhyme or reason to this. You're just going to get this thing filled up. And if you can see, I'm going to come not quite close to the top here. We're down a little bit. And now what you want to do, what unfortunately too many people make the mistake, they just slap the cap on and call it good. But we need to slowly work this shock in and out. You can see how the fluid comes up. But if you watch here, you might see, it might not be so bad since we didn't drain it all the way, but sometimes you're going to get air bubbles coming out. On a freshly rebuilt setup, you're going to get lots of air bubbles. You can kind of see in here, there's a few popping up here. So now what you could do is you can, they make devices for these shocks. It's basically a vacuum pump. It vacuums all the air out. You can see as we're sitting here, you're seeing some small, you know, small bubbles come to the top here. So what you would want to do then is you can set this aside. You can even let this sit for a few minutes, get those air bubbles out. Like I said, this one actually doesn't look like there's too many more in here. There's a few, they're working their way up to the top. That's the other reason when you don't fill it all the way, the air bubbles come up, bleeds it out a little quicker that way. But now typically what I'll do is I'll just put just a little bit more on here, because then here's the other important part. So this one can sometimes make a mess, but it is kind of important in making sure your shock is completely full and feeling good. I can already feel coming back it's going to be much better than before. Before you put your cap on, you want to push this up, I'd say at least 80% or just about all the way compressed. The other reason for taking your spring and everything off is just much easier to work with, and you're going to be better here. So we're going to take this, now that it's compressed, you're going to take your shock cap, we're going to put this, holding this in place, and we're going to put your cap in here. And you'll probably see somewhere along the line, we're going to get some fluid coming out here. That's not going to be totally surprised to see that. And we want to get this good and tight here. And you'll see it's actually trying to push the rod out on me now, which is normal. So what we want to do is clean this up here a bit. Get this off of here. Make sure she's good and tight here. And then it's basically ready to go. Shock feels 100% better than what it was before. To give an idea, that's what's nice. Sometimes if you're playing with shocks, you can do a direct comparison. Do one, change fluid, and then you can feel how it felt. This one, that little extra noise you can actually hear, there's a couple little air bubbles in there. So this thing goes in and out way easier, where this one just feels so much better. It's going to slow the rear end of this thing down. It's going to make it jump better and not want to donkey kick off the jumps. So now I am good on this one. We can put this on. We put the retainer back on. Oh, way better. And I am ready to rock and roll again and put this one back on. So I am just going to go ahead. He says you don't need to see the other one. I'm going to do the other one the same way, and I'll be right back. All right, both shocks are done. The other thing you want to do is when you're doing two shocks, like your rears or your fronts that are the same part of the car, you want to make sure when you're done that they should both feel the same, because you want to make sure you have the same spring rate. Sometimes you can get the car kicking one way or the other if you don't, if you're not careful. If you accidentally change front springs, rear springs on some cars, they can be different rates, and it can create some attitude issues on the car that can be hard to chase down. Finally, before you put your shocks back on, you want to make sure they're adjusted to, if they're threaded or if they use those little spacers, you want to make sure the spacers are the same, so they have the same preload on both. On this one, if I'd get really, really picky here, I could see this one is about a thread tighter than the other one. I'm actually going to loosen these up a little bit because I know with changing to this, so we're going to bring this one back up a bit, and then you can see where now we're up a little more than the other one. So you want to definitely keep these things even, as it'll really make a big difference for the drivability of the car. Sometimes if you're hitting a jump and it keeps wanting to tilt one way or throw one way, that can really be tuned out by suspension. So there we go, we're pretty well equal right here now. And these little guys on here basically are for a fake reservoir system that's on here, so that's why I didn't mention these earlier. They don't do anything in this case. So that's a basic parts. Hopefully I didn't forget anything, but that's your basic quick components, quick setup of what the shocks are. I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to throw these back in. The other thing to show you too is you can see, like, big shocks like this, everybody thinks there's tons of fluid. That's all that's in there. That's the only amount of fluid that's even in here. So it's not really a ton. Even in the bottle here, this was a full bottle, and you can see now I've used not quite half the bottle. So a big truck like this, if I'm going to rebuild all the shocks, you only need one bottle. You don't need to go too crazy. A lot of people go a little overboard with stocking up, but it's not too bad. So I'm going to go ahead and we're going to throw these back in, and then we're going to see what the result is here after the truck's back together. Okay, back in, installed, all set, and feels way better. Can't wait to get this thing out and give it a drive. I mean, the suspension just works so much better. It's not as soft in the back, so when I get off a jump, it's not going to want to just jump like this. It's slowed down, so can't do it here on the table too good, but way better than what it was. So now I think the attitude through the air, rather than coming off a jump and going like this, it should come off and stay a little smoother. That's what we were looking for, because otherwise this thing jumps real good, very responsive in the air. So that's about it for here for shocks. I'll do one a little later, maybe getting a bit more in depth of whether you can tune the whole vehicle, how to do it rather, maybe completely tearing down a shock and going from there. But just wanted to do something very simple and plain as far as refilling, because that's the one question I seem to get the most on, on any car, whether it be a Slash or the Super Rock Ray or a Desert Buggy or whatever the case may be. So that's going to be it for now. All right, guys, thanks for watching, and get out there and have some fun. Peace.